bring it all out as to who got how much in that deal. But we find in every deal in the defense there is corruption. And therefore, even ultimately how much we buy is itself much less than 2%. China has been consistently spending 6% of its defense, of its budget on defense. They're continuously modernizing it. But China knows that we have the potential to become a defense power, military power. And as your principal very correctly pointed out, that they first began by ridiculing your lunar mission, mission to the Mars, yes, the Mars mission. And then later on, when they found that it has now escaped the Earth's gravitational pull, they changed their tune. They are realistic people, the Chinese, and they know when to make an accommodation. So therefore, I'll begin by saying, find out where the Chinese are vulnerable and strengthen yourself there. Now, I asked a map of India to be put on because I wanted to show you that you see those string of islands. You know what that is called? I'm sure all of you know. That's called Andaman and Nicobar. So the string of islands there is Andaman, Nicobar. The last point used to be called once upon a time. Okay. Yeah, here it is. This thing. This is Andaman Nicobar. And this last point here used to be called Pygmalion Point. But now it's called Indira Point. And beyond that, there is ocean up to 90 kilometers. And then you have the island of Sumatra here. Now, what's so important about this? This part is called the Malacca Strait or the Straits of Malacca. What's important about this ocean gap here you find between that is between Sumatra and Car Nicobar, Indira Point. And that is that this area, this waterways, this water part, the Indian Ocean going through here, this is the area through which 90% of China's freight passes through. International trade of China passes through this area. Now you imagine if you had a strong navy here and you made a deal with the Indonesians who don't like the Chinese anyway and tell them, listen, on Sumatra we will help you build a port and let's have a pact that whenever we want, we'll close this off. China's economy will collapse. And they know it too. And they don't have strong enough navy to come and get it opened. And certainly if we develop our navy. So this is another very strong point, you see. Now, this is one point of vulnerability. China, of course, has been building, they cannot object. They have been building all kinds of ports all over here. Here is Sri Lanka. They have built one here, Hamantota. They have built one near Pakistan, Gwadar. They got one here. They have just surrounded India with ports. So if you want to do business with China, first build your capacity to strike at them if it becomes necessary. Without that, no friendship. Friendship is not some romance that you have in your teenage years. It's a serious matter, and of course, I know that many of teenagers think that romance is also a serious matter. But anyway, I will not get into a debate on that. And to say to you that relationship between two countries is a very serious matter. Similar, as I told you here, this whole line is the fuel, the supply line. And we, I think if I were to start scratching my head to find out one thing that Manmohan Singh has done, because he doesn't do anything, but is there anything, one thing that he has done for which we should be grateful to him? He has posted this is the area. He's posted here a big contingent of Air Force of Sukhoi planes for the first time in our history, which can fly fully into China. And we need to strengthen that. We need to have a very strong Air Force there. And anytime China wants to break into Arunachal or any of the other, cross the border, we should immediately not send troops to fight them. Go and bomb the supply lines. Later on you can have an advance of the army. If China knows we can do that, then China itself will be very practical and realistic and will not work on this basis. We have the same problem here also. The Chinese have cut through a road, which Jawaharlal Nehru watched it quietly. And now they are saying, well, these are all disputed areas. These are disputed areas and it's ours. Well, we have made a lot of mistakes in Kashmir. We need to rectify that. There is a popular view that we committed to hold a plebiscite in Kashmir. What do you mean by we committed? So I went to, when I was a minister, I called for the records and looked at it. I found that, you know that when the British left India, they not only divided it into India and Pakistan, but they also declared all the Rajas and Maharajas and Nawabs as independent countries. So 600 independent countries, Pakistan, India. And Sardar Patel then sat and got each one of those Rajas, and ultimately he managed to get 450 Rajas and Maharajas to sign what was called as the Instrument of Accession, where the king declares, I merge my country into India, or I merge my country into Pakistan. 150 countries, 150 independent countries which the British created merged into Pakistan, 450 merged into India. One that remained was Kashmir. And ultimately the Pakistanis lost patience because the Kashmiri king couldn't decide in time. So they got a bit impatient and they sent an army. First they sent them in disguise and then they sent the regular army later. And so the king got rattled and he came running to Delhi. And Sardar Patel said, first sign, and then I will send you the Indian army to protect you. So he signed. And it was under the British created Constitution of 1935, if any king signs the Instrument of Accession, it is irrevocable, is full and final. And it also says that the king does not require to ascertain the wishes of the people. So where did it come? It came out of a personal assurance given by Jawaharlal Nehru. I personally would not be bound by a personal assurance of any Prime Minister. If there is a cabinet decision, then all future Indian governments are bound by it. They have to honor it. But there is no cabinet decision. So somewhere we have to do something about Kashmir before we can take this up with the Chinese saying that this is our territory. Because right now, for years and years, this idea that Kashmir is disputed is going on. So as far as the Aksai Chin part is concerned, it will take a little time. And if you really want to settle it with the Chinese, you have to first settle the question of Kashmir and declare it to be an integral part of India in reality. I mean, we make these speeches all the time, but we don't do anything about it. And treat it as not only the portion with Pakistan, but also the portion with India is an integral part of India. At the moment, 1/3 of Kashmir belongs to Pakistan, is in the control of Pakistan. 1/3 is in the control of the Chinese, and we have just got 1/3 of the whole of Kashmir. So there we have a problem. But in my opinion, that is rectifiable also by discussion with the Chinese. Why should the Chinese talk to us? They may not attack us, because we have now we can create problems for them. We can create one more problem for them, by the way, which is in the economic sphere. What is this great Chinese model that everybody talks about? The Chinese model is simply this, that they import from East Asia. That means Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, of course, is now part of China, but technically outside market-wise. Japan, South Korea, these are all called East Asian countries. What they do is they import semi-processed goods of these countries and then complete the processing, add value, and export it to the Western countries. For example, this Lenovo laptop. You read on it what is written? Made in China, right? But it's not made in China. Only the casing is made in China. The main circuits and so on of the Lenovo laptop is made in Taiwan. And Taiwan then exports it to China. Why does Taiwan export to China? Because they find that the labor has become expensive. They can no more directly export to the Western countries. So they send it to China, to Shenzhen, places like that. And there the Chinese cheap labor do the processing, put a stamp made in China, and then export it to the West. So when China imports from East Asia, they pay the East Asian countries. So there's a deficit in trade. But when they sell to the Western countries and European countries, they charge a enormous price compared to what they paid the East Asian countries. And so that deficit of payment to East Asian countries is more than compensated for with what they earn from European and American countries. So we have now the Chinese model understood. Very little of what is produced in China is actually domestically manufactured in China. The bulk of its foreign exchange earnings comes from importing from East Asia and then adding value to it and then exporting it to the West at a higher price, much higher price, and then the net surplus is what China gains in its foreign exchange. Now the question is, if the East Asians can export to China, why don't they export instead to India, which has even cheaper labor than China? Because we have lousy infrastructure. If you come here, immediately first thing is corruption. China also has corruption, but then once you paid the boss, then you have to pay nobody else. Here you have to pay right up to the chaprasi. The peon has to pay. Everybody has to pay. You have to pay the octroi. You have to pay the traffic police. The roads are hopeless. The Chinese are beautiful roads. And if something comes to Chinese ports, everything is cleared within 3 days. Here it will take 2 weeks. Maybe the Communist Labor Union will go on strike also and create problems. So the East Asian countries' leaders tell me, we are ready to go through India. India is a democratic country. We don't have intellectual property rights in China. We are not even sure when we might be arrested on spying charges. We would be more comfortable with India, but your country is a mess when it comes to infrastructure. Improve the infrastructure, you are going to take away the main underpinning of the Chinese model. The Chinese realized that. So they now started slowly moving away from this model. But even today, if we can do it, we'll hurt the Chinese very much. We'll sabotage their foreign exchange earnings completely, and we will become the gainers of it. So this is another area where you can do. So first and foremost, build your capacity to tell the Chinese that if you attack us, we know how to reply. That confidence you have to create in the Chinese. Now, why would the Chinese want to discuss with you and come to a settlement? Well, there are many things which people told me that I cannot get done, and I got done. For example, when I first probed, when Mr. Desai asked me to go to China to reopen negotiations, the Chinese refused to. In those days, till I went to China on behalf of Mr. Desai, they never accepted that the border was a disputed area. They said, it's ours. There's nothing to discuss. We'll attack and take it over again if you start making these noises about it being disputed. Mr. Desai gave me the task of going and getting the Chinese to acknowledge that it is disputed. And how did I do it? The Chinese were in a terrible trouble in those days. I'm talking of 1978. When the Russians, the Soviet Union, was attacking China over an island in a river called Ussuri River. This Ussuri River island, the Chinese said it's theirs. They called it Chanbadao. And the Russians wanted to teach them a lesson. So they were preparing for a war with China. And part of that war was, when Mrs. Gandhi was still Prime Minister, was to enable Russians to come to India under the Indo-Soviet agreement, peace treaty or whatever it was called, treaty for peace and harmony and whatever. They were to come into India, and then from India were to go into Tibet and attack China from in Tibet too. My job was to go and convey to the Chinese that if they took a more reasonable position on the border, then we will not allow the Russians to come through India and go into Tibet. That assurance, I carried a letter from Mr. Desai. And that assurance is the one that turned the whole situation around, and the Chinese Premier then, Deng Xiaoping, made an announcement that there is a new government in India. It's a much nicer government than Mrs. Gandhi's government, and we are ready to negotiate with them on the disputed border question. That's the first time in 1978 they made that. And it was on a quid pro quo, that we will not back the Soviets in their attack on you, or at least we will not be of material assistance to them if you make this. This is the way to do business. And of course, in that discussion, I also slipped in that please allow Indian pilgrims to go, Hindu pilgrims to go to Kailash and Mansarovar. At first, Deng Xiaoping didn't even know what Kailash and Mansarovar was. Then he found out. Then he said, no, these are all old, all the roads, everything has got spoiled. So I said, you are great experts in building roads, so what is the difficulty in building a road quickly? Then they made a condition. Deng Xiaoping told me, you will go first and suffer for that trip, for what you are putting us through. I said, I will go first. It was a very hazardous trip for me in those days. It was really hard, climbing 22,000 feet to cross Lipu Lake and on the Indian border and go across China and finally go to Kailash. But today it is much better developed. Many of you, I would advise all of you to take a trek. There's an established program now, the Government of India through the Ministry of External Affairs arranges. Go and see, it's a beautiful thing to go and see Kailash and go and see the Mansarovar. You'll also see another lake there, big lake, in fact bigger than Mansarovar, called Ravan Haranga. And Haranga in Tibetan means, I believe, lake or Sarovar. And Ravan, because Ravan came and did a puja there. And that's where he got his Shakti from, Lord Shiva. And if you have a bath in that lake, you will get pimples and boils all over your body. and if you drink it, you will die. Well, there are a lot of Ravan worshippers in Tamil Nadu. I would advise them to go and take a sip of that and see whether they are real believers or not. Any case, you see, I demonstrated that if you give something to the Chinese, they will return something for you. Today, what is the thing that we can do for the Chinese? Well, first of all, we can certainly make their life miserable in the economy by creating an infrastructure by which the entire and their entire model will collapse. The second thing we can do is that, which in my opinion is something that we have to think about whether we want to do it or not. They are constantly afraid that we would back an independent Tibet. Question is, should we or should we not? And let me tell you that that subject has a much wider ramification than just an independence of Tibet. Once it is liberated, Tibet is liberated, it has to be defended also against China, because China will not accept this. So are we in a position to defend it? What is the consequence of doing this, breaking an international treaty not signed once but twice? That is a question we will have to consider. Certainly, there are human rights excesses in Tibet, but then human rights has become now a bad word in the sense almost every country is being accused of human rights excesses. We are accused of in Kashmir, in Nagaland, in Manipur. It's easy to make these accusations, but how far, we don't know. But there is one interesting development that has taken place, which the Chinese had indicated to me in a discussion I had last year, and that is the rise of Pakistan-trained terrorists in Xinjiang. They come from Tashkent. They are Uyghurs. They are trained in Pakistan and sent to Xinjiang. And most of the terrorist attacks there are being conducted by these people. So for the first time, the Chinese have got a taste of terrorism from their friend, the Pakistanis. For us, you see, the support of China to Pakistan is what makes Pakistan strong. If Chinese do not support Pakistan, it will not take us long to finish off Pakistan. Last time we broke it into 2, this time we can break it into 4. So that the only reason Pakistan is able to feel secure is the Chinese support. We have an incentive. Can we break this nexus between China and Pakistan? In my opinion, this development has opened up. The Chinese have responded to India's meeting on this question. So Indian experts and Chinese experts are meeting on this question. Indians and Chinese are meeting on the future of Kabul, because as usual, the Americans, who are great ones at cost-benefit analysis, have decided that they want to leave Afghanistan and go away, which means this Taliban would take it over. And Taliban will be a danger to both China and India. And so the future of Kabul, China has now a vested interest in discussing with us. So in this way, we can put it to the Chinese that these are the things we can do. Today, the United States is not, as our intellectuals sometimes seem to say, interested in building India as a counterweight to China. We keep hearing this. But there is no record whatsoever, no paper written by any think tank in the United States which says that the United States should build India as a counterweight to China. Because the Americans justifiably They say we build India, and what guarantee is there that tomorrow India won't turn against us, you see. They have to look at it from their point of national interest. We can have good relations with China, with the United States. There's no problem in that. But to be part of an American strategic offensive, I think is very difficult. And the Americans anyway don't like equal partners. They like junior partners, not equal partners. They would like some country to be like Japan or Australia and so on. And India is too big to be a junior partner of the United States. So if tomorrow there is a conflict between the Americans and the Chinese, what would be our stand? That the Chinese would like to know. This is another area where we have a bargaining chip, which will help us to change the current trend of a hostile China on our border. So what I am saying in conclusion then is this, that if you want to improve China-India relations and change the current trends, then it must be based on a rational basis of building your capacity to the point where you can reply to China on every issue on which you are vulnerable. 2, you must find things that China wants and you want, and see whether you can have an exchange of commitments on this. If China and India get together, they become a mighty force. We got together once recently when Obama was pushing some environmental package in Stockholm, or was it Copenhagen? And we found that both China and India found that this will really hurt Indian and Chinese development. So the two of them got together and decided to announce that they will jointly oppose this Obama package. And Obama had no alternative but to withdraw that package. It was a big humiliation for him. But that was possible because India and China came together. In my opinion, there is a lot of gain for both countries if we can work together. But let us not do what Jawaharlal Nehru did. Nor should we become a victim of those countries which want to create a situation where the two of us don't get together. Certainly, if India and China get together on international affairs, the country most unhappy would be the United States. I am not saying that we should seek enmity with the United States. The United States is a democracy. It's a home of some of the best innovations one can think of. And we have much to learn from them in technology transfer. But at the same time, Americans go by their national interests. And we must go by our national interests. If China and India get together, all our neighbors will also be okay. Dealing with Pakistan will also become much easier. And therefore, I would advocate that with this realistic outlook, if we seek to reach an understanding with China, it will change the current trends, which is this constant pinpricking that goes on in the two countries, and all our neighbors are taking advantage of it. We will be able to become a major player in the world scene. If China decides tomorrow to support India's admission to the United Nations Security Council as a veto-holding member, then nobody can stand in the way. By the way, the Americans had offered us the Chinese seat in 1950. China was a member of the Security Council in 1945 when the United Nations was formed. But then it was overrun by the communists. Chiang Kai-shek had to flee to Taiwan, and therefore the Americans in a rage expelled China from the Security Council, saying that we cannot accept this illegal government in Beijing. And for many years, Taiwan continued to be a member of the Security Council. At that time in 1950, the United States offered India the seat of China to be a member of the Security Council's veto in place of China. And Jawaharlal Nehru turned it down, saying, no, this seat belongs to China. And we campaigned for it. Every year we gave a speech that China should be admitted. And finally, Richard Nixon admitted China in 1971. And China didn't even thank you for keeping the seat vacant for them. International policy is not run on sentiment. It is run on realpolitik. Your strength, your capacity to deliver, to show that you mean what you say. Once you demonstrate that, it is possible to have good relations. So I would advocate, in the larger interests of India, we should have a working understanding with China, but it should be based on the reality of your strength and not on your sentimental love for China. Thank you very much.